33 minutes after the hour, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. He represents the 21st Congressional District in Texas. He's a freshman. He represents Bernie and the Hill Country. I'll bet you the Laity Lodge is in his district. He is a great American. Chip Roy, welcome. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. How are you? Yeah, it's a blessing to represent the area around Central Texas between Austin and San Antonio. And Lukenbach and Green Hall and barbecue and music. It's a great place.
Well, I'm glad. Are you enjoying being a freshman member of Congress? It's a little bit dizzying.
I enjoy it because it's an honor. I enjoy it, walking on the floor of the House knowing that we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. I don't enjoy the ridiculousness of many of my colleagues, but that's a longer conversation. But I'm there for a reason, and we'll keep fighting. What
I want to talk to you about today, you and I agree on what the president should do about the 2020 census having been handed a partial defeat by the Supreme Court last week. What's your view of what he ought to do now?
Well, I think that the president ought to move forward. I think that the United States Supreme Court spoke, but when they spoke, they left the door wide open and, in fact, invited, I believe, the president, the administration, to move forward. Specifically, Chief Justice was very clear that the citizenship question can be on the census. It has been historically. He was very clear that there was good reasoning offered by the Department of Commerce and their arguments for including the census question. And I think that the only thing that the Chief Justice pointed out was that he thought that the rationale that they used for having the question included this time seemed to be forced and contrived, over-lawyered. You can debate whether that's true or not, but the most important thing is the Article 2 power the president has here, combined with the census statute that Congress has put forward, says that the president ought to be able to do this. And in fact, I believe it might even be constitutionally required to have the citizenship question on there, because the 14th Amendment speaks to the need to know citizenship in order to penalize the government if they interfere with our right to vote. This is not hard stuff, Hugh. I've said this in the oversight hearings. I've said this in all the conversations thus far this year. Most people in America, I think polls show it close to 70%, believe that we should have the question on there. The president believes it. It's the right thing to do. And so the president ought to move forward. He ought to include the question in the census. They ought to start printing that. They ought to make a strong rationale and give an order and then answer the questions, go to the court, and pending the Supreme Court's decision before they release the census, which I think the Supreme Court would end up agreeing with the president and move forward. So I think they ought to just move forward and make the case.
You see, if an executive order is put forward, or even a memorandum, though I would prefer an executive order, that details Donald Trump's reasons for wanting the census question, that moots the previous record, in my view. And then it just becomes a question of whether or not that's arbitrary and capricious or actually irrational. It's a very high standard. And the Chief Justice, 4 justices are already saying, yes, he has that authority. I think the chief would flip and maybe bring Breyer with him. Let me give you another reason, Chip Roy, that occurred over the weekend. Cory Booker, to ask the question. Cory Booker was at the Essence Festival in New Orleans, and he said this proposal, cut number 20.
Every teacher,
every child born in our country as a birthright would have a savings account put up for them with $1,000 in it.
Now, Chip Roy, that means that Cory Booker has just given us another reason to count people who were born in the country versus those who came here both legally and illegally.
Well, if you pursue the Democrat agenda, not you, Hugh, but if one were to pursue the Democrat agenda, we would need to know citizenship for countless programs. The one you just pointed out from Cory, we've heard many talking about the need for health care, of course, being provided, and, of course, you got student loan forgiveness and all sorts of things. You would need to know citizenship data. I think that at the end of the day, you made the best point just a moment ago about the standard and about how what the court did here is they opened the door for the president to be able to reassert Article 2 power. I think this is a case where even those of us who are conservatives who have been frustrated with Roberts at times, this is a case where Roberts might have been really looking forward and just saying, hey, you guys just do this the right way and you're going to be able to reassert a little bit of Article 2 and Article 1 power by extension by engaging in this and making the point. And when the Chief Justice talked about it, right, he sent the case back saying something better than the explanation offered. But he importantly noted that no particular step in the process used by the federal government stands out as inappropriate or defective. And that's really important. It's really important how the Chief Justice said this. And the president has an enormous opportunity now through memorandum or through executive order to reset the stage. But this is basic stuff. We ought to know citizenship data. The president ought to act, and you ought to reassert the power to do it.
I want the audience to understand as well, when the Chief Justice's opinion, which is the controlling opinion, ended, it remanded the question of the census to the Department of Commerce, where it resides. The enumeration clauses in Article 1, it belongs to Congress like all the other enumerated powers. It's a mandatory exercise, though. And pursuant to the general scheme of the Constitution, it was delegated to the President of the United States by the Congress to conduct it pursuant to the Census Act, which has been done. The trouble with the Chief Justice's opinion, Chip Roy, is I think it creates a precedent for other district court judges to simply declare, I don't believe you in other administrative records. We've never seen that before. I think it's a narrow case on a narrow question that can be corrected, but there is a potential here for this having huge and mischievous effects.
Well, I agree with you, and this is the downside, and one of the reasons we get frustrated at Roberts. I'm trying to find the silver lining and move forward in the direction that I think the president can, the door that I think Roberts left open. But yes, when you start getting into the Supreme Court, getting into the head of officials and the why that they do certain things, that becomes problematic and opens the door to even further, basically judge-made law. And it's frustrating. And we're seeing how many times how many injunctions are we operating under now from some Ninth Circuit judge on border security policy, for example, about whether or not people can come in between ports of entry, whether the administration steps in a sovereign nation to minimize asylum to be at ports of entry. It would have really stopped this flow of 144,000 people being apprehended in May, over around 100,000 in June. And yet a district judge in the Ninth Circuit is single-handedly capable of stopping the President of the United States from being able to do that. I mean, things like that are really frustrating. And I think we do not want to empower judges to be able to make up the law, because right now we are more ruled by bureaucrats and judges and one or two members of Congress, i.e. the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader, than we are by the 435 elected members of Congress who represent the people. We've got to change that and turn it on its head.
We also have to change the presumption of expertise here. There is abroad in the media now a deep-seated, almost accepted without question assumption that someone in the Census Bureau who concluded that asking a citizenship question will lead to an undercount of people in the United States. They are saying that is in fact fact. That is in fact an administrative state's opinion as to expertise, but it doesn't alter the constitutional order or the census at all, Chip Roy. The responsibility remains the Congress, which gave it to the president. It is not up to experts to tell the president how to run the census.
No, that is exactly right, and it's not up to judges to sort of make that up as they go as well. But you're right, and it was important though that I think in the case that there was, I think you used the word trade-offs between accuracy and completeness with each option the secretary could choose. In other words, what the judge said was, look, the secretary can decide which one of these is going to be best for counting. And in this case, some people are saying it'll cause a problem. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's unproven, I think, is what the court said. And then maybe you go down this path and it'll have certain trade-offs. And that's not for judges to decide. And it's certainly not for bureaucrats just to assume. At some point, you have to make a decision that we are capable of going out and doing it, that we have a law, that if you are here legally, but you're not a citizen, you have nothing to worry about. You say, yes, I'm here, and I'm legally here, and I'm not a citizen. You're here and you're a citizen, great, not a problem. If you're here illegally and you're not a citizen, and you check the box that you're not a citizen, but you're here, there shouldn't be a problem. And if that results in some amount of undercounting, that would be unproven that we know exactly what that number would be. But again, that means there's a number of people here who are here illegally, and they're yet again not following our law to take the census and check the box. That's not our problem, right? Our problem is to follow the law and to determine who's here, both people and citizens. We need to know how many citizens are here to Again, I believe the 14th Amendment actually requires that we need to know how many citizens are here.
Last question, Chip Roy. There is an assertion on the left that you and I and advocates of putting the census question back are, in fact, attempting to deny representation for people of color by undercounting people of color, and that we have a racist intent behind this. I think this is ludicrous and absurd, but it's out there. What's your response to it?
It's facially absurd. I will say to you, look, I'm relatively informed on this stuff. The former first assistant attorney general of Texas, former federal prosecutor, I worked in the Senate Judiciary Committee, worked on Voting Rights Act in the past. But I will tell you this, I have no idea exactly how the numbers will unfold. I could argue that if we go down a certain path, depending on how we count, that Texas ultimately wouldn't get as many representatives, right? Or maybe they'd get more representatives and the percentage of Democrats could be higher. I've actually not thought through all of that because I don't care. What I care about is knowing how many people are here, like the census says, how many of them are citizens. I don't care where they come from. I don't care their race. I don't care any of that information from my vantage point. I just want to do our job, count people, and I want to know whether they're citizens or not for purposes of running our government, because we want to know how many citizens we have. We want to know where ballot boxes are. We want to know how many services go to citizens and how many are going to non-citizens and so forth. All of this is reasonable information to know as a government. It's absurd to say that this is all motivated. And I'll say one last point on that. I believe redistricting, while I understand it has always been political, I believe it ought to be much more centered on community and getting districts back to some sort of consolidated area in and around a tighter community approach. It's hard when you deal with one person, one vote, plus the Voting Rights Act, plus politics, to have districts that aren't strangely drawn. I think we ought to do a better job of getting back to that and making it less political. So I don't accept that charge at all. It's frankly absurd and offensive.
It is absurd and offensive, but it's out there. I wanted you to answer it. Congressman Chip Roy, thank you for joining me from Texas's 21st Congressional District, one of many future meetings, I hope. Thank you, Congressman Roy. We'll keep you posted online and throughout the day and tomorrow on what the president does on the census question. It's a big moment. It's a pivotal moment about whether the president is going to defend the powers of the presidency. An article